Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Strength and Weakness podcast. We're happy that you joined us again today, and we look forward to our conversation. I have my co host, Ellen, here, and today we are going to be talking about something that might sound a little bit familiar, but we have a different perspective, a different vantage point on it that we think might, appeal to some of you. What we're going to be talking about today is if you are in some sort of pastoral ministry. That could be anything from I lead worship on Sundays, I help sing in our band, I lead a small group at my church, or I am in the full time ministry. Um, we how do you handle when your child comes out with whatever that news might be? Today we're going to be using coming out as gay or coming out as transgender since that's our field of interest. But this could really be anything, right? Like, how do you handle these big moments when your child is going through a season of life that you might not like how it reflects your position of ministry, if you will? And we're going to get into some of the, how can you handle it yourself and how can you help your child go through it? But we're going to end the podcast actually with 7 really solid practicals that Ellen uses in her practice. In helping parents navigate this really hard time. So we hope that you're excited to join us for this conversation. And before we jump into it, Ellen, any thoughts that you have on this topic before we get into the nitty gritty?
Yeah, I was just thinking, and because you've served in ministry as well, I have people reach out to me through therapy, through my, pastoral counseling organization as well, who have served in ministry in, like you said, any capacity, even people who have served for decades. And a lot of times when something big like this happens in their life, where they feel like they are having a tough time navigating it and they need some extra help, this kind of, big bump happening in life can already produce a lot of isolation, a lot of loneliness and fear and shame for anyone going through this. If you serve other people ministerially, pastorally, a lot of times that shame and isolation can really get magnified because it feels like I've
Yeah.
heard this time and again. There's no one safe for me to talk to about this. I think we should talk
Hmm.
about if that's true and what that should look like, right? But I hear that so much from people in that stage, or in that, situation in life. And so I just want to acknowledge that I know this is tough. I know that isolation and shame are usually high. And along with that, this panicked fear of if someone were to find out, not only would this affect my credibility, but also my livelihood. And that can be even more threatening in terms of fear.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like we have, right, like a multitude of things happening, right? Like one, how do you support your son or daughter during this time, right? Like, how do you provide, like, as a parent? Okay. So you're like, what are the parent roles and responsibilities? How do we respond? We're going to get to that at the end with the practicals. Second is like, how do you navigate your own feelings,
Mhm.
your own emotions during this process so that you could be the best parent? Third is going to be your job, right? Your livelihood. How do you navigate if you are in this pastoral ministry, do you have to tell your boss? Do you have to tell the people you lead? Do you need to give like a forewarning of what's going on? But with that is like, how do you do that without breaking confidentiality of your family? Is there a requirement to do that? I'm very curious your thoughts
Mm.
there. Um, and then lastly, like what does God think about it? Right? Like how does God view it? How does he view your vocation and like do you step down? Do you keep going? Right? Like there's so many questions around that. So I think today like and really just so listeners you guys can understand where we're coming from, right? Like Ellen and I get these questions often, but too like we have realized especially strength and weakness we are really supporting churches in Christians who are navigating this in their communities. I think when you're talking about the LGBTQ community and various aspects of it, right? Like we focus more so on how to help Christians navigate this. And if you're a part of a healthy church body, I feel like you typically serve in some sort of capacity, But I think what you were talking about, Ellen, is like this magnitude in which you feel the weight of this news can be based off of like how involved or right like in what capacity you serve within your church ministry. But I do I do think that there's a little bit of like, well, serving in the community in God's church is serving in God's church. So all of it is, we're all at the same level because we're all Christians and we're all sinful. So, anyways, that's kind of I think how we're gonna frame this. We'll go through each of those buckets and give some best practices and thoughts as we do that. So one, like let's start with what God thinks about it, because I think that is by far most important. Ellen, I'm curious your thoughts when we're looking at like our kids coming out and how we navigate it from like God's perspective and our vocation to God if we're serving in some sort of pastoral ministry, what would you, based off of your experience and even your own faith journey, like how would you put into words God's perspective of us serving when it comes to navigating our children coming out?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is unafraid. God is not afraid of this, right? He grieves it for sure. And we can definitely join him in that grief. But I think, I don't know, I'm not God. Don't have a direct line to him. So I'm not exactly sure. But what I understand about God is he is very interested in our hearts, and our
Mhm.
hearts must be refined in order to grow closer and closer to him. So when something like this happens in life, I don't think he's up there like, zoop, I'm going to zap your kid with, gayness or the trans gene or whatever, so that you can be refined. I think sometimes we feel that way when we go through something difficult. Certainly don't
Yeah.
like life has enough troubles of its own, has enough hardships of its own. I think God's like, okay, here we go. We can use this to draw you closer to me. And I really think that's what he's after here. So I don't think God is afraid for your heart when your kid comes out. I don't think he's afraid for your kid's heart. I think we see it as this, oh no, my kid has deviated from my faith and this puts
Yeah.
them farther away from God. I think God, he's playing the long game, right? He's like, hey, one more way that I can draw that child closer to me and one more way that I can draw that parent closer to me. Sorry, my throat. So I think, how does God feel? He feels unafraid. And my kind of phrase that I always say is God is above it. I don't mean that as God will take care of it. He'll make all this go away, right? I just mean God is above it. He's not as worried as we are, right? We can stand anchored in that reality that God is above it. So what I see a lot when parents, either their child comes out or they serve in some type of ministerial capacity. Actually, parents who are dealing with anything difficult go through this, but it's magnified when you're serve in pastoral ministry. I always say that they try to keep it from falling apart. They do anything that they can. That's the denial stage of grief, right? What can we do to hold this together, to not make our life fall apart with this? And honestly, I think the best thing you can do when something like this happens is let it break. Let your life fall apart. Let the grief happen because that's what's going to lend way toward your personal refinement. And if you are a leader in any capacity, that's what's going to help you to be refined into a better leader, which I would use synonymously with servant, right? That's
Mhm.
what Jesus said that leadership is servitude. And
Yeah.
so the best way we can go about that is drawing near to God. And the best way to draw near to God is when we're in an intense moment of refinement in our lives. So how does God feel? He's above it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I actually was I listening to my devotional this morning. I listened to Lectio 365, which plug, it is an incredible resource. But the scripture that they were reading today was Second Chronicles 36 through 9. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the understanding here is like in verse, I think it's 8 or 9, it says, "If you return to the Lord, then your fellow Israelites and your children will be shown compassion by their captors and will return to this land. For the Lord your God is gracious and compassionate. He will not turn his face from you if you return to him." And the whole idea was this, like, God is just waiting for us to turn to him. And one of the questions they asked in reflection was like, God is like, what did you how would you envision God's face when you, like, turn to him in whatever times that is? And I think that's kind of how I envision God in these moments where, like, the truth is, like, we are all going to go through hard things in life. And being a mom now, I feel like one of my biggest jobs is trying to teach my kids how to do hard things. Like, we have the mantra,
Mhm.
like, "I can do hard things," because these hard things just feel so overwhelming. And the more I'm a parent, the more I'm like, Wow, we are all just going through the same things over and over and over and over and over again in life. They just are different and they feel heavier because we know all of the consequences. We know,
Mm.
like, what's behind the curtain, if you will. And I envision God just being like you said, like, it's just a chance for us to return to Him in these hard moments. And I'm very much a catastrophic thinker where I'm like, okay, when I was pregnant or when I had a baby, I was like, I'm going to be the person who loses my baby. Like I would always like think these really
Yeah,
big catastrophic thoughts.
same.
And something that has always helped me in these really big, overwhelming feelings is like, if that's my story, God will get me through it. Whatever it is, if that's my story, like it doesn't mean He doesn't love me. It doesn't mean that He's leaving me, but it, it is the story that I will have, and, like, what am I going to choose to do with that? Either run away
Yeah.
from God or run to Him. So, I think the understanding of, like, how can we return to God even in these moments because He wants us to come near to Him, draw near to Him, and we will find comfort, we will find rest. Like, He will not turn His face away from us if we come to Him even in these really big moments.
And think about how meaningful that is, especially for a leader, because so often leaders in any kind of ministerial context, they feel like the safe houses for people, right? They're the strongholds that people run to. They're the shelter and protection for lots of people, or at least that's how they can feel. And what a mercy from God to say, wait a minute, this is something difficult in your life. Don't forget, I'm your protection. I'm your stronghold. I'm your safe place, right? When we as leaders can feel like the safe place, we have to be reminded. Sometimes we think that comes out of us, but
Yep.
it really streams from God. And we need reminders of that in our life. And I'm not saying God is creating this reminder for you in your life, but utilize this time in your life to draw near to God so you can get fed, so you can continue to help feed other people.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I mean, you and I have both served in some sort of, ministry capacity, and I feel like I was the best leader when I could really empathize with the people that I God had put in my care. When I
Yeah.
could, like, share about the hard times and how I drew near to God in those hard times. I do think that there is a deep understanding when you can look at somebody who's going through a hard time, be like, I've been there and this is how God is going to help you get through it. I've also erred on the side of like, I'm really strong and I can get through this and you can get through this. And let me give
Right.
you like my willpower so that you can willpower yourself. And that was never fulfilling. And that really is not what God is calling us to as leaders. Um, but rather like, right, coming alongside people and walking through the situation with them, not being their savior, not being the one that's going to get them through it.
Yeah. If I had to think of like a formula, what are the characteristics that a leader needs based on I'm not talking about based on a church context level because I think a lot of times in church context, leaders look very similar. They're type A, they're passionate, they're outspoken, they're good speakers. That is not what we see in the Bible. And that, like you said, that's not really what we've seen even anecdotally with boots on the ground. That's not really, those are great qualities to have. I'm not knocking that. That can absolutely help aid a great leader, but those are not the qualities that you need in order to be a great leader. I think if I had to boil it down, I would say it takes presence and nearness to God. And I think out of presence comes compassion and empathy, which is so helpful. And out of nearness to God comes an anchored rootedness, right? And I think
Mhm.
parents or people navigating difficulties, for example, parents navigating a child coming out, I don't think a good leader means that everything in your life is perfect and nobody can see any flaws. In fact, I think that would be a really out of touch leader that I would not feel safe with coming to with a problem of my own. I would
Mhm.
feel really safe going to a leader, though, when I saw that when they encountered difficulties, they engaged in the refinement process by running back to God, and that when they were present with other people, even in the midst of their own struggles, right? So I
Yeah.
think nearness to God and presence with other people is probably like the two main components that I can think of that I've seen in great leadership.
Yeah, definitely. And right, okay, so let's talk about the second pillar, which is okay, now your livelihood. So Right, we're talking about, okay, how are you a great leader when you can come alongside somebody and step into this refinement? But there is this other complex part of, okay, but this is how I get a paycheck. This is how my family survives. Um, I'm afraid to lose that because I'm going through this. So how would you guide somebody through that process if the fear that creeps in is, but this is my job
Yeah.
and I don't wanna lose this.
I would say first, differentiate if that's just an insecurity on your part. And I think that would be really normal if it would be. I think any person in a leadership position who's going through something like this would think that. But try to differentiate. Is that realistic? Like, am I in an environment where this could get me kicked out of my job? I really hope not for your sake,
Yeah,
right? Like, I really
me
hope
too.
you would be on a team of people who allow some space for your humanity, your children's humanity, especially when you don't have control over what they do. Now, there
Yeah,
are some things that do prevent you from leadership according to your own specific bylaws, right? I'm not sure I've ever heard of maybe I'm sure it does exist in churches where have in their bylaws a leader cannot have a gay or trans child. So if this goes against your bylaws at all, or the rules of engagement, if you will, for serving in your specific church, then maybe it would be appropriate to think about next steps. If there's any kind of time period that you can step away or whatever, right? Whatever your leadership deems appropriate. But I would say for most churches, at least most churches that we would work with, that is not a part of their bylaws. And there is room for humanity, not just your own, but also your children's. And so I would really get to the bottom if that's just a personal insecurity or if there's really a threat of you losing your livelihood. If so, you might not be in the best team. You might need to find another team that can allow some space for, just fallenness and humanity. But if it is an insecurity, I think it's valid. I think it's worthy bringing to God. I do think that transparency often helps with that kind of insecurity because, again, we can get to this place where we try to keep it all together. I don't want to lose my livelihood. I don't want people to think this about me. I don't want to feel that shame. I don't want my kid to, have those prying eyes. I think um, wise transparency, right? Transparency with discretion in who you tell and how you tell them. But I think being transparent with some support for you, obviously, but also some of your leadership to let them know, hey, and you can let them know this in a very anchored, rooted way. I want to let you know what's going on. We are not good, but we're good, right? Like it is well with our souls, but we are dealing with this. We're having a hard time, but we are anchored to God. We're getting the help that we need. We're getting the support that we need. So I think a lot of it will depend on how your mood and your tone in sort of informing other people of this, right? If you're so filled with shame and insecurity, I think other people are going to read it through that lens. But if you come
Mhm.
from this very anchored, rooted, I have a clear conscience. I have no control over what my child does. I do have control over what we do now as a family. We are anchoring ourselves to God. We are getting support. We are not afraid. God is above this. I think that's going to go a long way in how other people understand what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have another podcast on that. We're not going to get into the details of like you processing it as a parent right now. We have a podcast we'll link in the show notes as far as when your child comes out and how to handle that and your own personal walk. But I want to touch on something, Ellen, that I think plays into this a lot, which is what I typically see in ministerial circles is okay, you might be anchored, but your child's on social media, and then all of a sudden, everybody sees your child start posting things on social media, and they want to go by they, them. They are, they've changed their appearance. And all of a sudden, right, like what starts circling is not necessarily gossip, but it's people putting their own stories together. So, as a parent
Sure.
in ministry, how do you navigate, right? You can go to your leaders and say, "Hey, just want to let you know this is going on in our family." But at what point, like, do you have to acknowledge it with with the people who
Church.
you're
Hmm.
leading, like with the church? I couldn't imagine this is like, "Hello, everybody, my child has come out," right? Like, I don't think
Right.
you need to make some sort of announcement, but I do find this really hard, even for the child, because they know that their life is on display as the child of a pastor or any, leadership capacity. How do you navigate that in like from a job perspective? I mean, I think about it in my own shoes, right? Like No, but none of my customers, I'm in sales, none of my customers were like, "Well, Morgan's children are doing this today." Like, they don't care about my family, but for
Right.
some reason, church followers find a lot of interest in the
Isn't that
children
true?
of their leaders, and I don't think that's
Yeah.
healthy. We can make another podcast about that, but
Yeah.
how would somebody in pastoral ministry navigate that?
Yeah, well, you're right. We kind of put leaders and their families, including their kids, in a fishbowl. I was a preacher's kid myself, and I remember someone coming up to me saying, "Ellen, you need to stop biting your nails. You're the preacher's daughter. People are watching you." I'm like, biting my nails? Guess what, lady? I still bite my nails. So anyway,
That's wild, and the freedom that people feel to speak into your life, and you're like, "I don't
yeah.
know you. Please don't tell me how I should live my life."
Yeah. So, but it's true. I would again like go back to what is true to that anchored rootedness. Is that something from God's culture or from our church culture, which is fallen? And I would say that's something of the church's culture, right? Like we see over and over in the Bible. Um, there were leaders in the Bible who had really off the rails kids, really disobedient to God kids, right? And so that obviously does not prevent a leader from being a good, effective leader. So we need to really anchor ourselves to God's truth, not to our cultural norms, even if it's cultural church norms. We have to be really careful there because I think sometimes,
Yeah,
especially when we grow up in church, we can think that church norms equal godliness. Not necessarily. We have our own fallenness even in church culture. So we have to be
yeah,
careful about that. Let me tell you how I personally would handle it. I don't think this is the only way to handle it. If my kid came out and he or she is posting stuff on social media, I would probably address it with my group because it would feel more comfortable to me to do that. Not because not because I think it's right or wrong, right? It's not the moral decision. It's what makes me feel more comfortable in navigating this. Again, to me, that vulnerability and transparency helps to douse out the feeling of insecurity. So I can
mm,
set the tone for how other people view this. And I can let
yeah,
our group know, hey, we're dealing with this in our family. Let me show you how we're dealing with it, right? Even in this, I can be a leader by exemplifying, drawing near to God, getting support, allowing myself to engage in the refinement process, and not being ashamed by brokenness, by fallenness, even if it's my own or my child's. I think
yeah,
that is so much more powerful as a leader than saying, no, no, look over here. Nothing's happening over here. We're perfect, right? Like
yep,
that's so much better. That's the kind of leader I want and the kind of leader I would want to be. So that's how I would handle that. I think other families have chosen to handle it just kind of a little bit more insular. And I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with that either. I think it depends on
yeah,
what feels right for you and your family. You're juggling a lot of things right now. Like we said, your livelihood, your own refinement, your job, right? Your commitment to serve other people in this capacity and what's best for your family and your child. That's a lot of things to juggle. No one can say this is 100% of the time how people should handle it. Only you and God and your spouse, if you have one, can kind of wrestle through and figure out how are we going to navigate this?
yeah,
So you can deal with it more insularly. Just make sure you have some support, or you can deal with it a little bit more publicly. But if you do, make sure your child. I don't want to say on board because if you're going to share about your own refinement, that has to do with you and not your child. Obviously, you're going to have to disclose some stuff about your child in order to share about you. So you're going to want
yeah.
to make sure that your child is knows. You don't want to spring that on them. You want to give them some time to process through that, and you want to make sure as much as possible they feel as comfortable as they can because you don't want to exploit what they're going through for the sake of helping other people by modeling your behavior here.
Yeah, for sure. And I was thinking too, like, especially if you're in like a small group situation, right? And you have families with kids that are the same age, I could also see it helpful. Like, hey, I just want to let you guys know
Right.
if, my child brings this up to your kids, this is what's going on, or this is what's happening to help also prepare other parents for that if their kid brings it up. I think too, what you mentioned is like, w- with your child specifically, like sharing with them, I think it even kind of brings them into the fold to say like, "Hey, like, we respect your boundaries, but we just wanna let you know that, like, we are also going to be sharing this, this, and this," and come to that mutual agreement so that
Mhm.
they feel connected to you during this process. Um, I could just imagine that being, an important conversation to have, so that your child, again, yeah, doesn't feel exploited, um, throughout the process. But, yeah, I think there is that fear that, how is this going to affect my livelihood? But I think the moral of the story is, like, hopefully as leaders who are leading you, whether you are leading the church and or you're leading a small group, whatever capacity, that one, you have like the space to be able to process it, that you also have people that are willing to walk alongside you and give you the support that you need rather than also pushing you to either hide it or, like not acknowledge it. We would hope that you would have the space to be able to do that.
Right, because let me just make a really clear distinction. I think we're saying this, but let me just say super clearly. This is not sinful. You have not sinned here. You're not a bad parent because your child comes out. There's no sin on your part to take responsibility for, right? So when I said check the bylaws, that's kind of what I meant is hopefully this is not in your bylaws because you have committed no wrongdoing here, no sin.
Yep.
This is a difficult thing you have to engage with in your family, but you can absolutely do that as a leader and even utilize it to help other people. This isn't something you need to go repent of and take some time off for.
Yeah. And let's also say this, everybody's child is going to do something that they don't agree with or that everybody else is going to judge. Like, and I think that is something that even as a parent of a 7-year-old, people can lose sight of, where it's like all of
Mhm.
our kids are going to
Mess
sin
up.
and fall short of the glory of God. And how are we going to start processing through these little moments? Because let me give you an example. I know a family where there's 3 kids. One of them kind of went off the rails in college. 2 of them were very straight edged, like, didn't do a lot wrong during high school and college, and now one of them is in adulthood, and unfortunately is ending their marriage. Okay, all
Mm.
came from a Christian home. What's really interesting is having these conversations, the adult that is ending their marriage, shame came up where it's like, "Oh, well, am I, disappointing my parents? Am I disappointing my church? Am I" right? Like, all these big feelings where this child who could have been seen as like, he's a perfect child growing up, is now going through a really hard thing as an adult. Like, we
Mm.
will all go through really hard things, and as parents in ministerial, capacity and or just parents in general, like, every child is going to go through their own hard time, and, like, how are we going to support them? And I think that is just also what I'm learning as a parent is, like, if I think that there will not be any hard times with my what I think is my perfect child right now, like, I will be sorely disappointed, and I will have a really hard time processing that,
Yeah.
when the hard times do come. So
Yeah.
let's pivot to now as a parent, how do you handle, your child coming out? So we talked about like how does God feel about it? How do you process it when it's your livelihood and it's your job? But now like what are, I know that you, Ellen, have 7 practicals that you typically talk through with your clients who come to you who are in this situation. Want to wrap up on like a really good practical list that they can navigate that can help them navigate through this situation.
Yeah, so I usually break it down into 2 parts of practicals, right? One is the heart level practicals, and I think we can do that in a different podcast episode. One is the practicals of that immediate moment of your child coming out. What do you do, right? I think this is like a stop, drop, and roll plan because a lot of parents want to just be like, no, that'll never happen to me. And then it happens and they don't know what to do. And then they
And they're like, "I
usually,
really wish I remembered that one time
yes.
that somebody told me what the stop, drop, and roll would be, and I actually don't know," and
Exactly, and then they usually make it worse, and then they reach out and they're like, "We're bleeding, help," you know? And so here are some yeah, I think it's 7 practicals. 1, take a deep breath. Slow it down, right? Like, the visual I have in my mind is you are in spiritual warfare, not necessarily for your child's heart, that's God's responsibility. You are in spiritual warfare for your own heart here, right? Like, you have to slow down time. You ever seen a movie with a lot of action and like a big moment of, intense war scene comes
yeah.
up and everything slows down. You can like hear the heartbeat, they make that sound effect and everything slows down. You see it in slow motion. Move to slow motion mode, right? Like stop what you are doing, get on your kids' level, look them in the eye, take a deep breath so that you can move on to number 2, clarify. what do they mean, right? You want to really get the story. That's number three. Get the story, draw it out so that you can create some sort of connection here. That doesn't mean agreement, but that just means connection. I see you. I hear you. I'm understanding. And as part of that, get the story. You really want to clarify, what are they saying? I can't tell you how many parents I talked to. Their kid just came out to them a few days ago and they reach out to me and they're like, what do we do? And I'm like, all right, what did they say? And they're like, I don't know. I don't really know. I'm like, what do they want to do with this? Are they dating someone? Or is this a feeling they have that they don't, want to indulge in, but it's just they're attracted to the same sex? And they're like, I have no idea. So you don't need to know the whole story right now. That's not going to happen in the initial conversation, but try to draw out the story and then clarify, what are you hoping to do with this? What are you hoping my response will be? What do you want in the future with this? Right. And then draw out that story again to create that connection. Ask things like, how long has it been since you've been feeling about this? Tell me what it's been like for you keeping this from me. That must have been so hard. I want to understand. I want to see you. Then you
And
want to,
I
yeah,
think so I have such an example about this because, right, my daughter is only 7, and when she was 6 in 1st grade, she came home and was like, "Mom, I have a boyfriend." We don't even talk
excuse
about
me.
boyfriend, girlfriends in 1st grade, right? Like, that's not even something we talk about at home. But it was so interesting because I immediately wanted to go to this, like, flight, fright, freeze. I was like, "What did she just say?" in my head, right? Like, if you've ever seen the movie Inside
Mhm.
Out, like, all of
Yeah.
my emotions were going off.
Yeah.
And it is so hard to not just be
Yeah.
like, "What? We don't do that," right? Like, and shut it down. That's a negative. But it
Yes.
was so interesting because I asked her, I was like, "What does a boyfriend mean?"
Exactly.
And she was like, "Well, we like to play together." And I immediately felt this sense of relief where I'm like, "Oh,
A friend, that's
she
a good one.
doesn't actually know what this means, and it's not as big as it isn't as big to her as it is to me for her to say that."
Yeah.
And so, because I was able to be like, "Oh, interesting, you guys just like to play with each other. Okay," and I asked a couple of more questions, and that helped me decide how I was going to handle that. I didn't go into, "We don't have boyfriends, that's not healthy, blah, blah, blah," but rather like, "Oh, interesting, she likes playing at recess with this boy, and somebody else gave them that label, and so she's just repeating back to me what that label was instead
Yes.
of it being this bigger thing." So,
Yeah.
I'm already feeling that at 7 years old with a
Yes.
boyfriend. What? So anyways.
Clarification is key. I give us another kind of funny story in my book about this, that when I was probably about 7 or 8, I asked my mom, "Mom, what's a period?" Because I heard it on a show, and she explained menses to me, and then she clarified after explaining, then she said, "Where did you hear that?" And I said, "Oh, on my show, the character said I missed first period at school." And so then my mom had to, like, backtrack it and explain what a period of time at school, that kind of a period from,
And you're
high
like,
school.
"Hmm."
Yeah, I'm like, "What? Now I know all this stuff about menses that I wasn't, ready for, or my mom wasn't ready for me to hear." So, yes, clarify first before you respond, before you, lay down a boundary, clarify. And I think that's a great phrase to say. What does that mean? Tell me what that means to you. Then draw out the story, create that connection. After you draw out the story, you want to, I call it catching the football, validating. It basically means summarizing what you heard them say in your own words so that they know you are listening actively and that they feel
Mm,
somewhat seen by you. So this is not necessarily the time when I say validate in the LGBTQ realm, a lot of times it means that you agree. I'm not saying validate in terms of agreement. You can just say, here's what I heard you say. You've been feeling this way since you were 8. You haven't felt comfortable telling us. And now you notice that you're attracted to the same sex and you want to let us in on it. Right. So just kind of summarize what they said. And then I would thank them. Thank you for trusting me with this. I don't take this lightly. This is a big deal. Thank you. Right. So catch that football and include a thank you in there. Then
which
I would,
is really hard to do. When
yeah,
you're processing,
yeah,
like, I think even I felt that when it was like my daughter was telling me that she had a boyfriend, I didn't wanna be like, "Thank you for letting me know." But I think what helped me, like, frame it was, like, if my desire is to be connected to my child and to maintain connection with them, I do want to thank them for letting me in. Like,
yes,
that is, if you can, in the moment, keep the big picture in perspective, which is really hard to do. Like, I think It's just hard. It's not gonna be easy, but I do think, like, seeing that, like, they thought you safe enough to share that. That is a really big deal, and it means you're doing a great job, parent. Whatever you have done leading up to that
Yeah,
point, they finally felt safe enough to let you into that part of their life, and so if you can, like, zoom out and keep that perspective, I think it'll be easier to say thank you. It
I
was hard for
agree.
me in the moment, but
The best gift we can give anyone or the best gift we can receive from anyone is to know them or for them to know us, right? Like that connection, seeing us or us seeing them. That's the best gift there is. And
yeah,
so that's what you're thanking your kid for. Not like, thanks for being gay. Thanks for
yeah,
being trans, right? Like you're not thanking them for that. You're thanking them for allowing you to see them, allowing you in on this part of their life so that you can know
yeah,
them, which is a big part of what we want our parenthood to be about. So
yeah,
get that story, thank them, however hard it may be, validate, by summarizing, and then
yeah,
set what I call a temporal boundary, time boundary. So now that is all that you need to do in terms of talking. There is no other words that needs to happen right now between you and your child, no boundaries, no decisions, nothing, right? You just need to make that connection, be a safe place for them to tell them, thanks for telling me. I heard you. This is what I heard. We've clarified. We're on the same page. Now I need some time to go pray, to go process, to go draw near to God, to talk to your other parent if you have one, to get some advice, to get my arms held up, in prayer so that I can be an effective steward for you during this, right? You're going to have a lot of big emotions come up and you are not going to want to parent out of those big emotions. You're going to want to parent out of that surrendered rootedness. So you cannot do that in that moment. So put a temporal boundary. Sweetie, thanks for telling me. We're going to talk about this more. I need some time to process. Let's talk about it this weekend or next weekend after I've had some time to process. So that time to process, that's another episode where we're going to talk about like the heart practicals, right? What to do during that time of processing. But during this like initial conversation, build in that temporal boundary. This should not be a 3 hour long conversation with your kid. It's only going to go off the rails. Just get the story, clarify,
yeah,
thank, validate, move on. Say, hey, we're going to talk about this later when I've had some time to get my bearings in this. Then during that break, pray, process, get help, and then set up a time to touch base with your child. Set a date and time. Don't just say, we'll talk about this later. Say, next Saturday at 2 p.m., you, me, and dad or mom are going to sit down together and we're going to talk this out and kind of all get on the same page here.
yeah.
Those are the 7 steps, right? Slow down, take a deep breath, clarify, get the context of what's really happening, get curious, get the story so you can see them, validate them by summarizing, catching that football, thanking them, set a temporal boundary. During that temporal boundary, during that week or so that you have to process, pray, reach out to us, get advice, grieve, right? Draw near to God, and then set up time to touch base.
Yep. And I think too, during that temporal boundary for yourself, like continue to love your child, which I know sounds funny, but I think for me, when I'm processing really hard things, I can withdraw, I can kind of be into myself. And I think just also remember that your child is going to be like sitting in this waiting period as well. Like, oh, I have this looming conversation with my mom in a week. Like that's how I was when I was a
Mhm.
teenager. So I knew if I had a follow-up conversation with my parents, probably wasn't gonna be great, and I am, like, kind of waiting in, anticipation and anxiety until that conversation, and so even I'm not saying you have to, like, be overly, affectionate to them, but I think just continuing to be like, "I love you, sweetie," still hugs in the morning, you know, not like go on as though nothing happened, but I think just continuing to validate your child so that they don't feel like, oh, I told my mom and dad this, and now I'm waiting for this conversation and they've withdrawn from me during this. Like, right? Like, if I think about
Yeah.
God, I'm like, when I come to him with something really big, he draws near to me while I'm drawing near to him, even if I don't feel in resolution with God, like God has given me an answer yet.
Yeah.
And so I think just remembering to continue to communicate that affection and love to them during the process for whatever's
Yeah.
normal for your family.
I love that. That's so true and a great reminder because What's true about the human condition, you know how earlier you said, my whole life I've been waiting basically for the other shoe to drop, right? When I'm going to lose a child, I'm going to be the one to die early of
Yeah.
cancer. That's where I go. My husband's going to be the one that dies in a car crash, right? Like, I think that's probably more universal than we realize, but we all kind of do that. And I think we're all waiting for the other shoe to drop in life, but especially in love and relationships, and never more true for our children. I think we're always doing
Yeah.
that with God. Like, we're always kind of testing are you still going to love me if I'm really this wretched, if I'm really this sinful? And God has shown us time and again, yep, I'm going to keep drawing near. That's
Yeah.
what we want to show to our kids, but they're feeling that same insecurity, right? So almost, I can't think of a child who's come out to their parents who doesn't feel this way, where they're like,
Yeah.
all right, I'm going to choose to be brave and let you in and let you know what's going on. And even the best, most supportive and loving parents, every child is going to be afraid. Is this going to be the shoe that drops? Is this going to
Yep.
be the time that my parents say, this is the point of no return. I won't love you anymore. And I would say for most parents, of course, that answer is no. And, on some level, their child knows that. There's always going to be that insecurity because we are humans. We were made for God's level of perfect love. We have to settle for human love, our parents,
Yeah.
imperfect human love. And because of that, we are always waiting for the other shoe to drop. So just know that going in, you can't take away that insecurity for your child 100%. You can
Yeah.
absolutely show them, I don't view you any differently. My love for you has not changed. You are still my daughter, my son. I still love you no matter what. We want to exemplify for that for them in the same way that God does for us. I think the ultimate goal that we're aiming for here as humans, as Christians, as parents, even as leaders who are going through difficult times, is that anchored rootedness, right? And I would describe it like this. I had a client once who's actually now my co host on my other podcast, the Heart Set Above podcast. And she said once in our time in therapy, and I remember this, that now I share it as often as I can. It was our last session together, and we were kind of closing our time out. And when you do that, you kind of go through a review, right? What did you learn? What tools are you taking with you? And she said, well, therapy is different than I thought it would be. I thought I would leave with all my problems solved, but I realize life still happens. Like, there's still problems in my life. But what I've gained is that now the rug can't be pulled out from under me in life, right? Like, now I'm on sure footing. I'm standing on sure footing. And even when life is crumbling around me, I have a stable place to stand. And I think that's what we're aiming for here, especially as leaders going through a rough time, is we're
Hmm.
not aiming to keep everything from crumbling around us. That's going to
Yeah.
happen. We need to let it. We can utilize that to draw closer to God, be a better leader, right?
Yep.
But when it crumbles, not if, but when it crumbles, we want to be rooted in that security that we have in God. We know who God is. We know who we are before Him. That's all we need to know and to feel. Again, sort of like you said earlier, what would God's face look like in total adoration to you, even through this difficulty? That's going to lead to sure footing, even when all of life is crumbling around you. That's our goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hope that, right, walking away from the podcast today, that you feel like, one, there's the space for you to be able to like work through hard things, and that two, like God has put you in a vocation where you get to serve the church and you get to have the privilege to walk alongside people, but that doesn't make you exempt from having to go through hard things, such as a child coming out. Um, and so in our next episode, this is kind of a part one to a part two, is like, okay, so if you're a friend of somebody whose child is coming out, how do you walk alongside them if they are in pastoral ministry and you might be in pastoral ministry as well? How do you provide a support to them, um, to make sure that, right, the family has the support to hold their arms up during this really hard time? So we hope that you will join us for that next conversation.